Hello, everyone. We're back today with another episode of Incessantly Seeking. Let's talk about love. And today I have a very special guest, a friend of mine and a fantastic creator, writer, director, Lanre Olabisi. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Our friendship is really interesting because we met 10 years ago. We went to acting school together at the same time in the same studio, and then we kind of ran into each other randomly and then reconnected, and it's been such an enlightening relationship to have in my life because out of a lot of the males friends that I have, I feel like you're so in tune with yourself.
Oh, thank you.
So the conversation I want to have today is this idea of healing. And what does
Mhm.
that mean? Is it self-work, self-improvement? I know from our conversations we've had some experiences that have really changed your life. And I would love for you to share that with our audience today.
Were you thinking about any experiences in specific that you wanted me to go over, or because I'm not exactly sure where to start? It's such
Sure.
a big question.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, throughout our conversations, I loved books that you have brought up that have helped me evaluate myself and how I show up in relationships.
Right,
You also mentioned a silent retreat that I'm super
right.
curious to hear more about. Also, like if I'm able to not talk for like 10 days or a month, and how did that change you in terms of self-awareness and whether or not you think that this work is really life-changing.
Oh, okay, okay. So I'm going to start with a book. I'm looking back here just to see if I have one of the books that was actually kind of like the start of it all, right? And unfortunately, I do not think I have it here. I can't see it. Um, but I remember that, in terms of the relationship book that I'm trying to find, it kind of started when I was reading a book by Malcolm Gladwell. I don't exactly remember which one it was, to be honest with you. I think it might have been Blink, but he had spoken about this one marriage therapist who is able to predict divorce with a like divorce within like 5 years or something like that with a 95% certainty. His name was John Gottman. And that was something that really fascinated me. So I actually went down the rabbit hole and started really reading everything Gottman. Um, and my wife actually got into the Gottmans as well. They have this thing that they call the Love Lab out in Seattle, where they hook you up to a bunch of devices and they start taking like your blood pressure, they detect your heart rate and a whole bunch of other things. And they look at the little expressions that you're making, just so that they can start evaluating your relationship. Let's see if I have it here. Because at the end, they give you this booklet on essentially what are the strengths and weaknesses of your relationship. I used to have, is it there? Ah, it's not there. Sorry, I can't find anything today. I think it's in the other room. But yeah, we have this booklet that kind of evaluates the strengths and weaknesses of our relationships, the things that we need to work on, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that we've been doing lately is his book called 8 Dates, which I suggest to anyone, right? It's something that you can do after 50 years of marriage, and it's something that you can do after 1 month of dating, right? And I think what happens oftentimes with people is we go into these relationships with all the best of intentions, and then after about a year or two or three or four or five, we just see that things that may have been warning signals early on, we kind of ignore, gloss over, but they just keep on getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That had we had these types of conversations early on, we could have nipped that in the bud and not have wasted a bunch of time on something that probably wasn't going to go anywhere in the first place.
One of the best advices that you've said to me. It's been a lot of really great stuff. But I remember being so heartbroken and disappointed at someone, and how they behaved, and how I'm like, but they broke my trust. And you laughed and you looked at me and you said, what do you think marriage is? You are going to consistently disappoint each other, and you have to like overcome that and continue building a relationship. And I've learned that mending is so important, how to immediately, if possible, like deal with the issue at hand. So when you and your wife went to this workshop, let's call it, how were you still dating, or you were already married?
Oh, yeah, we were already married. Yeah. But it's interesting that you say the whole thing about, mending earlier on, because it reminds me of, I believe, I hope I'm not misquoting, but I think I'm pretty sure that this is accurate. The Gottmans have said, they call the people whose relationships are very functional and working really well masters. They're people who figured out how to master their relationships. And then they call the people whose relationships are not working so well disastrous, right? And he's like, and I believe they say that him and his wife both write the books together, John and Judy Gottman, or Julie. Gosh, I don't want to get their names wrong. I am looking up the Eat Dates book right now because I have it. It's Julie, John and Julie Gottman. But they say there's really not much of a difference between the masters and the disasters. And the biggest difference really comes between the masters are more adept at mending the relationship when something goes wrong. So they're not going to allow something to fester for like a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, right? They're going to kind of nip that in the bud relatively quickly once both partners get back down to zero, if you will, like calm. Because when you can't really have a conversation with somebody, a productive conversation with somebody, when you're both flooded and you're both heated and you're both like in the midst of an argument. Even though we try, it almost never works. So yeah, my wife and I had been studying and looking at this stuff for quite some time. So we finally decided to make the plunge and just go out there, and we made a vacation out of it as well. And yeah, we learned a lot about ourselves. We learned a lot about our relationship. We learned a lot about the strengths, things that we had to work on, and we learned a lot about the weaknesses. And one of the things for us, since we both come from neither of our parents, my parents were divorced at a very young age, and neither of us had very strong role models to model our relationships after. So it's kind of like we kind of, and that happens with a lot of people, and sometimes you can figure it out on your own. We weren't able to figure that out on our own, so that we needed people to kind of help us through the way, because there's a lot of minefields along the way, and if you know what you're looking after, or if you know what to look for, then you can see it, and you can go around it.
One of the things that I love that you said about, it's like how the masters address the issues as, as readily as their nervous systems are back to a calm state, basically. But, that's really a good point, because when you withhold things, they just fester. You
Yeah.
either start to get resentful or even more, or you're creating stories, right? Like I struggle with assumptions because, like you said, we all come from a different background. So whenever I'm dealing with my relationships, this has been really a challenge for me to start to be curious about the other person. Okay, why is this person behaving this particular way? And is it because they're mad, or they're really angry, or are they hurt because I did something, or are they, and try to get to the bottom of that. It's just hard when you're also emotionally charged, and then you're like, why are you behaving this way? And instead of being like, let me investigate the situation.
Right. And I mean, and that's one of the big things that we learned in the therapy. And my wife is, I mean, she's really, really good at this now. Because what we want to do normally is just give a bunch of you statements. You're doing this, you're behaving like this. And that almost never is going to work with somebody, because what does it do? It has them start to be on the defensive, right? And if you can stick with I felt this way, right? When I can't think of a very specific example right now, but the more that you can keep it on to yourself, like how you felt, not what you did to make me feel this way, but it's like I felt like this, like we had an argument, and afterwards I felt betrayed. I felt not heard. I felt unseen. I felt not important, right? And most partners are going to be able to respond, very with grace, right? If obviously if you love the person that you're with and you want what's best for them, you're not going to be like, ah, fuck you, I don't care. You're going to be like, oh, okay, so what could I have done better to fulfill your needs?
So what I'm hearing, which I think is what I'm discovering, is how important this self-discovery journey is to be able to communicate with the other how you're feeling. When did that start for you?
Starting, when did what start for me?
This
Trying
journey of
to
self-discovery, of self-understanding.
probably about in 2005.
Is
No, 2004.
is there a particular event that triggered it?
No, I don't think so. I just noticed, I think I felt like there was something that had me just want to figure out myself better, want more out of life, more out of, yeah. And I also come from, I also come from an athletic background. I had wrestled in high school. I later wrestled in college, at the University of Michigan. And one of the things that I had always seen from, like the best athletes, the best wrestlers, was that you were always looking for something, however small, to get better, right? You were never, ever, ever, ever going to be done. You can always get better at something. So I've always taken that attitude in every aspect of my life. So as soon as I see a weakness or a deficiency that I have, it's not that I'm trying to fix that weakness per se, right? Because you can you're never going to be perfect at anything. I think, well, that's one of the beauties of being human. But it's like, okay, what areas am I weak at? Where do I need to either mature? Where do I need to strengthen? What can I do to become a better, more realized, more fulfilled human being?
And I love that because, I feel most people are like me, who go through something traumatic and just had a realization, or they realize that, yeah, have a realization of sorts that they want more out of life, or they want a different kind of life. And I've had little bits of this throughout my entire existence. I had it once, I think, when I got married, and then again when I had a divorce, and then again when I decided to change everything and become an actor, and then again and again and again. So I call these like mini rebirths. And I feel like I had one recently in my last breakup when I was so heartbroken, and it forced me to sit and think, what is this person bringing to my life that I'm not bringing to myself? Why do I feel like I need this person to fulfill something that I'm not fulfilling for myself? And I had to sit down and look at my life in the face and be like, okay, why don't I have the things that I want to have? And why am I looking at another person to provide them for me? Be it, good friendships, be it fun, be it an warmer home, be it whatever it is, right? There's different things people get into relationships that fulfill whatever needs they have. And
Right.
that for me was the thing. And I embarked on this insane journey of self-discovery. And now I just wish I've done it sooner. I wish I've known about it sooner. I wish somebody has handed me an impactful book sooner, because the amount of change I was able to create in my life in the last year, and it hasn't even been a year since I started. I started my therapy with Dr. Mack in June of last year, 2022. So now we are in February 2023. So I'm looking at 7 months,
Mhm.
and it's been a roller coaster, but I can safely say, in which I have, having a conversation with my ex recently, was that I am the happiest I've ever been.
That's awesome.
Am I happy and complete? No, of course, like you're saying, we want more. I want a different, I want more for my career, I want more for my relationships. But now on a Saturday night, if I don't feel like going out, I don't feel obligated to just hang out with anyone just to do something. Some days
Mm,
I sit at home and I journal on, like, let me think about how I feel about my experiences with childhood relationships, and then I think about what you're saying. My parents were never able to mirror for me what a healthy relationship was. I look
right,
back and I'm like, we didn't have anyone who mirrored that for us,
right.
and then break that down. What does that mean in the way that we face relationships,
Mhm.
right? So it's really been very eye-opening for you. What was the first thing that you did in this path? Was it therapy? Was it a book? Was it
Um, I think the first thing that I did, I went 2004 was when I first went to therapy. And then after that, I started reading books. And then after that, I would take these different sorts of growth, growth and development classes. And then after that, I started meditation, um, like full on. Um, yeah, I think that, and then I went into the gut and started doing couples counseling with my wife. But we started couples counseling when we were just dating. Like
Ooh.
once we knew, yeah, once we knew that, oh, okay, I think this is something that has a future. Then we said, again, I think we both knew that we didn't grow up with the best models, so let's attack this head on.
And how was therapy when dating?
It was fun. I mean, it was. I think we're able to uncover more things now. I think it's very interesting because now we've been married for 9 years, we've been together for 12, and I had never understood the concept of loving someone more now than I did the day that I met them. Never understood that. That made no sense to me whatsoever. But after having continually done all this work, because people are always going to, you're never ever ever going to be able to know somebody completely. It's just impossible. You're never going to know all their thoughts, all their experiences. No one, right? um and I think that's one of the beauties of marriage, because you can continually keep learning new things about the person year after year after year. And that's why we continue to do this 8 dates book. We go on dates weekly, and then we just talk about the relationship, and I get to learn new things about my wife through open-ended questions, because she's constantly changing, I'm constantly changing, our relationship is constantly changing, and it just ensures that we're both changing in the same trajectory.
Um, and I'm curious, for you, when you first started therapy, was there any kind of stigma? Did you ever feel like, I feel the question is regarding, a lot of the men that I know, specifically men of color, are very resistant towards any kind of therapy. And I know it has as a Latina, for me, my family still, like, my sister finally started therapy just to see, maybe last year, mid of last year. My mother still refuses to do it, and my God, if I would ever bring it up to the males in my family, forget it. So I wonder if, and I see that in America in some levels as well. I don't think it's just that. I think there's a stigma between men and women and what's what we should present ourselves to be like. Did you ever feel like that was a determining factor, either holding you back from doing therapy or self-work, or propelled you to?
Definitely. I mean, I'm not sure if it was because I was male or what, but I do remember I lived in Spain for a while, and I had this friend that used to read a lot of these, like self-help books, and I would make fun of him all the time for it, and he would go to therapy, and I made fun of him for that, right? So for me, there was definitely some sort of stigma attached to it because you kind of start thinking, well, I would think, well, obviously there's something wrong with you if you need to go to that thing. Um, Ain't nothing wrong with me. I'm perfect. Right.
Famous
Um,
last words.
right. And so once I realized that it had nothing to do with that, and then once I also realized that it had more, at least understanding that we all have weaknesses, and being um man enough or mature enough to admit that I do have weaknesses, and that I wanted to address those weaknesses. And there were things that I was doing that I either wanted to do better, or things that I was doing, patterns that I continually got into, and I was noticing the patterns. I was like, why am I still doing that? And not realizing why I was still doing that, but no, but being smart enough to realize that it was a pattern, then it's like, oh, okay, let me start talking about this so I can get to um, the core of it.
And I love that. I've been reading a book recently called The Will to Change, and it talks about the male experience in society and how girl babies and boy babies are raised so differently just from the moment that they're babies, and how girl babies are allowed to cry more and they're cuddled more, and boy babies are told to, like, oh no, he'll get over it, just let him cry, he'll toughen up, it's going to be fine. And how that reflects throughout society, where we are raising these men who are learning to be so detached from emotion because they were told that that's the masculine way,
Mhm.
and how that trickles down to everything in their lives, the way they show up in their relationships or who they believe they need to be. And then therapy becomes such a big stigma. So
Well, yeah, I think it was difficult for me to access initially my emotions, because I was like, how do you feel? I don't know. So I really didn't know how to express them early on. Um, I do think, I do think, I was about to say, I do think that, just, I wonder how much, the testosterone of a male plays into that whole thing as well, because I know that definitely affects our moods. Um, which is, like the different hormones that course throughout our body obviously affect our moods, as well. Plus the way that we're raised, which I always found fascinating.
yeah, I feel like our generations now and to come are so much more informed about early child development and, emotional intelligence. That was a word that became known when I was, college time. So those are things that I think our generations and the ones to come are going to be evolving on. But then you went from therapy to reading books to a silent retreat. And how did that impact you? Because I talk a lot. So just the thought of like not being able to write, read, or have any kind of language, I'm just so curious. What does that do to yourself?
Um, so I've been doing those silent retreats since 2008. So quite some time now. I'll go on one a year. It's a 10-day silent retreat. And the thing is, it's not hard to not talk. That's actually probably kind of the easy part. And technically you are allowed to talk. Like if you need something, you can ask the course manager, or if you have a question, you can ask the teacher, who's always there to answer questions. Um, I think the harder thing, at least for me and for other people that I had spoken to, is being with yourself and your own thoughts for that amount of time. And one of the things that I experienced there, which I thought was quite interesting, at least the first time, because the first time it was really, really, really tough for me. I noticed that the things that I most tried to suppress are the things that were coming up on the surface. And so for me, anxiety, which I never realized I had until that 10-day retreat, because I was like, why am I so anxious? Why do I want to do stuff? Why do I want to run around? You know, like I just felt so wired. Um, so anxiety was one of the things that came up for me, and anger was another thing that came up, right? Because I don't really express my anger because that was something that wasn't it was frowned upon growing up in my household, so I would always kind of suppress it. And then I found it bubbling up, and I was like, why am I so angry? I don't know why I'm so angry. I don't know, you know. And so the thing about the meditation is you don't act on any of these things, you just observe it, you notice it, you observe it, but you don't act on it.
That's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's like it's like another one of those things, right? That like I said before, you're never going to perfect it, and you can practice it for the rest of your life, getting slightly better each day, but never coming to the point of where you're like, okay, I've mastered this, I'm done, I never have to do anything again.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'm working on, it's definitely emotional regulation. I feel like my emotions just flood and take over, and I'm like, all over the place. So that's that, and also like self-control of just not sending that text, or be able to live in that uncomfortable place if things are not tidy. I used to be very black and white. You're my friend, you're not my friend. You know what I mean? Like I've always been a very tidy kind of person. When I end a relationship, I need to end it in good terms. I need to like send that, wish you the best kind of thing. Otherwise, it bothers me. And I think that comes from that codependency of my growing up, that I had to be the child that had to like make everybody else happy so that I could feel, safe and comfortable. Because that's how they responded to me the most, was like when I was making their needs met first before mine. They were like, oh my God, you're the best kid. So I learned that, and listening to you, I'm like, yeah, the pandemic was kind of like that for me, when I had to stop and face myself and realize, what is this life that I'm living and what do I actually want out of it? Because it was the only time in my life where I sat somewhere with nothing going on, because the world was shutting down, and that FOMO thing that we deal with, that anxiety. When you're talking about this 10 days, I'm like, did you worry about your phone, or like, did you ever check your messages?
Well, they take your phone, so
So there's no way to
can't.
know, like, what if there is some kind of emergency with your family that never crossed your mind?
Well, then they know where to reach you.
Okay.
Right, so you could just give the number to somebody, and if they need to call you, if something happened, then they call you,
See,
let you
I was
know.
at my anxiety as you were saying that, so I'm like, but what about this? Um, so I
And in
love,
my experience, nothing ever happens. Yeah, every single time that I've come out, I'm like, I'm gonna get some sort of important email, something important. Never has happened, not once.
no, that's good. And then from that, you went to meditation, which is the last topic I want to bring up today. So, how did meditation kind of fit into this whole self-discovery and self-improvement path?
Um, well, the whole meditation is about observing yourself, observing your breath. It's about mastery of the mind, right? Developing that mastery of the mind, and also ultimately not reacting to
Mhm.
things, right? Um, and allowing yourself to respond, instead of with hatred or negativity or ill will when something happens that pisses you off, to be able to respond from a place of love and kindness, loving kindness and compassion, right? Which I think ultimately we all strive to do, but then sometimes you're like, oh man, why did I just do that? And so the meditation starts teaching you, if you will, how to do that subconsciously.
And, as you know, I struggled with that recently because when that ex turned up and apologized, I was very angry still. And I surprised myself because after all this time of self-work, I wanted to respond, like you said, with kindness and love and altruism, of like, let me address your feelings. But in that moment, I was like, no, like you get to hear the damage that you left on the wake of you burning down everything on your way out. And at the end, what I learned is that it didn't make me feel better, you
Right.
know. I thought that was it. I had many like daydreams about the day that this man would apologize and I would say all my truths, and I said all of them, and it didn't really matter.
Nope.
So how do we get this sense of wholeness as we're going about these life and relationships in trying to be our best selves, in your opinion?
Well, the sense of wholeness has nothing to do with another person. The sense of wholeness is always going to have to do with you and you being whole and complete without the need of another person to come in your life. Right. And I think that's a mistake often that happens with people is they feel like, oh, now I'm whole and complete now that I have this other person, as opposed to um, feeling and being whole and complete, irregardless of if another person is there with them or not. Right. And to your point, one of the things that I found, right, because I think we all daydream about that when we felt that we've been betrayed or wronged or something like that. Where I can't wait till this person comes back and I can tell them how I really feel because I know they're going to come back. And every single time that has happened to me in my life, when it's happened, right? It hasn't necessarily made me, well, it hasn't ever made me feel good that the person's come back, or it hasn't ever made me feel like, oh, okay, now I have complete closure, right? Because I feel like again, the closure needs to come from within. Closure needs to come from you.
I love that. Let's go back. Tell me a little bit more about the story that we get to this quote.
Well, so this Gottman book, it's called Eight Dates, and it's one of the things that I thought was really powerful for us because sometimes like when my wife and I would get in these heated discussions because she's very passionate, um and I'm very passionate, and sometimes that just we'll have these heated arguments. And when she'd just be sick of stuff, she'd just like be like, you know what, I'm done. Take off a ring, slam them down, storm out of the house, right? And then we read this book. I'm going to read the passage from Eight Dates, which I thought was really powerful. And it goes like this. There is no question that committing to a person can be a terrifying prospect. It means putting all our eggs in one basket. There will be no one waiting in the wings if the relationship doesn't work out. There is not a safety net. If things aren't going well, we go to no one else to complain. And by the way, that was a very big thing because if I was mad at her, I used to go to like a friend to complain, which a bunch of people do.
Oh,
Right.
I've made
And
that
this
mistake. And
and
that's what
this one says
go ahead.
we go to no one else to complain. Instead, we need to go directly to our partner to work things out. So once I read that, I said, and I was speaking to a friend the other day about that, and I was like, since I read that, I've never gone to him ever to complain about her again, right? And I committed myself to not doing that. Also, if we're committed, uh, we have given this person everything we have to offer. There is nothing left over for another lover. That's a risky decision, but it's essential. Without this level of commitment, love will not last. Choosing commitment means accepting your partner exactly as he or she is, despite their flaws. It means never threatening to leave, even if at times you might want to, right? And so both of us, again, made that commitment, but we're not doing that. And she's never thrown off the rings again. Like we've never, ever had that issue again. It means caring about your partner's pain as much as, if not more, than your own.
Mm.
As John Gottman so aptly puts it, if my wife isn't paid, my world stops so I can listen to her. Right. So we also made that commitment for one another too. In a committed relationship, we both stop the world and try to understand and ease each other's pain. This is partly why we got married. And this is partly why we love. We need each other and we need to be needed by each other. True commitment is choosing each other over and over again because ultimately, what makes a relationship work is the decision to make them work.
Like anything in life, isn't that true? Like when you decide that things are going to work, you put in exactly what that book says, your commitment and all your efforts.
Yeah. And it's just like, okay, boom, this is our commitment. So it's come to the point where, again, I was telling another friend of this. I was saying that it's kind of like she's at this point she's family, right? So it's not, if I get in an argument with my sister, get really mad at my sister, she's still gonna be my sister. I'm still gonna be talking to her, right? We're gonna freaking work it out, no matter how furious I am. I mean, I understand that there are people who don't speak to their moms or dads or whoever for years, for the rest of their lives, until they die because of some slight that may have happened. I'm not that type of person, right? I feel like life is too short, so I'm gonna figure a way to get the relationship back on track, and especially, have to have that with my wife because we see each other every day.
Yeah,
My sister, I
absolutely.
might be able to be pissed off at her for a month and be like, I'm not gonna talk. Yeah, but yeah, but with my wife, we're just gonna figure it out.
I was laughing at the story of the ring because that was how I was in my relationship. Was like something went wrong and I was like, no, I can't do this. But, I realized later it came from a sense of not feeling emotionally safe.
Right.
Because in my marriage, when I, committed to someone, never did I say that, ever. Never would I take off a ring or say any of those things. But the day that I did, it was done. And in this last relationship was very interesting because I really didn't want to leave, but I consistently felt like I running away because I felt like something wasn't being said, or it was like the lack of full transparency. And that doesn't mean that there was a lie or anything was wrong. It just means that that person wasn't able to communicate, it wasn't willing, it wasn't trying, but it generated a sense of untrustworthiness, I think. But in my last chat with him, I did say I apologize too, because I don't think that's the way to be in a relationship. It wasn't fair to him for me to be in a relationship consistently threatening to leave.
Right.
How can you be happy? How can you give yourself to someone if you think that they're going to turn around and do that again? I
Well,
think,
then the person's not going to fully be vulnerable because they're always going to be on their toes because it's like, okay, this person may leave, so I don't trust you fully, so I'm not going to open up to you fully. And then I feel like what you're saying creates a cycle, right? Because you notice, wait, why isn't this person fully open? Why aren't they feel like something feels off because you feel like there's something off, right? And it might be that one thing that you're talking about right now. And the more you feel off, the more that you threaten, the more that the person pulls back, you feel even off more, you threaten, pull back, right? And it just becomes a cycle that you can't get out of.
and now that I am, on the aftermath of that, I feel so much more emotionally regulated. And I look back at it and I'm like, oh, it's okay. Like all of those emotions and feelings were there, to the anger and to the feeling of like, you know, having to tell the truth. So whatever it is. But now I'm finally in a place that it's like, I'm no longer feel charged, emotionally towards this person or relationship. And that's like true freedom. And, my last message was, I hope we can be friends, because I realized we weren't friends ever, because I don't
Mm,
talk to my friends like that. I don't run from my friends like that. And the way that the relationship ended, I wouldn't treat my friends like that. So certainly he didn't treat me like a friend. And that was really the ingredient that I think was missing the whole time,
mm.
you know. So do you feel like this self-work and this development of understanding towards you have helped you really be more open to the other person.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, it, of course, it can't not. It would be really, really hard, right? I think because I think the more you are able to understand yourself and understand why you tick, the more that you're able to be, what's the word? Be gentle with yourself, have compassion with yourself, have compassion for some of the flaws that you have, and then also have compassion for other people's. And sometimes, as most people know, or most of the time, we're harder on ourselves than anyone else.
For sure. And I think about that too. I'm like, how much compassion exists for me for other people if I can't be as compassionate to myself? Maybe if I know how to be more compassionate to me, I can show a compassion for others that is even greater.
Yeah. You can ask people what their inner voice is saying, right, about themselves, and they'll say some really nasty thing that their inner voice is saying. And then you ask, well, if a friend of yours was saying that to you, what would you do? Well, I've never talked to them again. It's like, okay, then why are you talking to yourself like that?
That is a hard realization. I think most people don't realize how mean their inner voice is.
Yeah, yeah, and it can be very mean, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's learning how to be compassionate to yourself, right? And
And
not letting yourself get away with murder or anything like that, or get away with bad behavior and be like, okay, I'm going to be compassionate to myself and be a total dick to everybody. But it's like, okay, if someone were going through this, how would you talk to that person, right?
yeah, and listen, this is not the Catholic Church. You don't get to do whatever you want and then repent right before you die and then go to heaven. It doesn't work like that. You have to, like, what's what they say, that the best apologies change behavior, right? So sure, you can have your come to Jesus moment, pun intended, and then apologize, but what really matters is what happens next. Are you
Yeah,
going to continue being the same person and just saying, oh my God, I'm so sorry again? Or are you going to be like, okay, I am genuinely sorry and I'm going to do everything I can to be different from here
right,
on?
right. Agreed.
Any last things that come to mind when it comes to self-knowledge and how to go on this path of really learning who you are and becoming just a more grounded version of yourself?
Yeah, I just think it's a lifetime journey, and I think that's one of the beauties, to be honest with you, of being human and continually growing, continually learning, not becoming complacent, being like, I'm perfect, I know everything, and realizing that you have strengths, you have weaknesses, um, and trying each day to get better at your strengths and trying each day to, eliminate as many weaknesses as you possibly can.
Oh, I love that. And we're all just trying out there.
Yeah, yeah, everybody's trying the best they can.
Thank you so much for being here today. I think this was a really great conversation about what is self-work and how do we start to maybe heal, maybe grow. I keep looking for the right word for this discovery of self. What would that be? Um, but thank you for being here and telling us more about your journey.
Thank you for having me. It's great.